2002. So this has formed the foundation for plotting libraries like Seaborn and Bokeh as well. So this was originally created as a patch for IPython to enable MATLAB style plotting. And these can be the most important part of Matplotlib is its ability to play with different operating systems and graphic backends. So this is one of the most popular plotting library in Python. And so some of the examples here are line plot, histogram, scatter plot, 3D plot, and so on. We're going to be focusing on just a few of them and how we plot some basic graphs and all. So first one, we'll just start off by importing all the necessary libraries. So for matplotlib, it's matplotlib.pyplot, and then we're using NumPy here as well, so we can uh, create our points. So our first plot is a basic line plot here, and we're using this by using NumPy, the NumPy module, and this line basically creates 10 points from 0 to 10. So and we use this line number 5 to plot, and we have labeled it as linear. And when we add plt.legend, it shows here as linear. So we get a straight plot. And yeah, like when we put plt.show, we get a straight plot. So this is one basic plot. Next, we are going to be using styles, and we're going to implement a bar graph. So what is a style in Matplotlib? So it's something that is used for supporting. It's used for adding, customizing properties for your graphs. So like all these properties include, fonts, labels, colors, even background as well. So the most important style here is ggplots. And for those of you who know R, who are using R for visualizations, most of you must be knowing a package as well called as ggplot2. So this was created as a package for data visualization by Hadley Wickham back in 2005. So ggplot basically was the foundation for ggplot2. And so okay, so this is one of the most widely used plots. And here I've listed some other different styles for Matplotlib. So here we have all these types of styles which you can use. And there is also an option. Matplotlib also gives you an option to define your own style as well, although we won't be looking at that here. But there are methods to change your style and customize it to whatever however you want. So here we are focusing on making a bar graph. So our bar graph is simple. Just use a bar graph, blt.bar, by plotting x and y, which is our list here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we give it a title as info, and our y label as y-axis here, and x label as x-axis. And when we put show, we get this as our bar graph. Next is we're going to be looking at an histogram. I'm sorry, this is just another bar graph. Must have named it wrong. So this is just another bar graph, and some additional points here I've used is something called as this for certain plotting points. So you can just for red. Suppose we have 13579. So there we are using it as for red, and for these one we are using it as for green. This green is given by giving a parameter known as color, and this color can be given by, for green we're using as G. So here are so here we again use the X label, Y label, and then we get a bar graph. Okay, here we are using. Okay, now we are going to be looking at a histogram. So an histogram is something that, so what many people don't know, or are just a basic question that comes into mind is, what is the difference between a histogram and a bar graph? So histogram is something that histogram is basically a representation of plots for categories of data. So basically, histogram is so that's why histograms usually have something known as something called bins. So bins represent separate quantities, and yeah, so that's just a basic difference between histogram and bar graphs. So plotting PL. So here we're using PLT.hist for plotting a histogram, and we pass the parameter as population ages, which is this list over here, and we're going to be specifying our bins equals 5. So this means that these values here, these are being categorized into 5 different parts, which in this good graph where we here you must be noticing vertical histogram and look attractive. So I've specified a link over here, so where you can just check out the different colors for you can specify, and this link has different colors and how you can specify them. And again, one more thing I've specified here is color palettes. So this color palettes is usually used when you want to, you know, display different types of data. So, okay, let me just open this here. So our color palettes we are using here is, we're not using it here, but the different color palettes here are sequential, diverging, discrete. So these color palettes are basically used for, you know, uh, different types of data that we use. So sequential is something that is into the same, same type of data. Diverging is when there is different types of data and so on. Here is an example of a scatter plot. Scatter plot basically is, in the name scatter points on a graph. So here again, I've given values for x and y, passed it into this parameter, and s here is the size of the points. So if I change this to 50, the size of these points will increase. And marker is specified as O. So when O means this circle type, if I specify it as V here, let me do it here once. Yeah. So if I specify it as V here, the points turn into V in a V shape. So that's how that is for scatter plot. One more example here. This is the last for matplotlib. This is the pie plot. So pie plot, we must have used it in our high school. So somehow we have a basic idea what it is. So I'm just taking an example here and passing in parameters. So we're going to just be focusing on what the parameters are. So first parameter is slices. So this is obviously the data we're passing to plot, and labels equals activities. Activities is what we're going to be specifying for our parameters. So 7 corresponds to sleeping, 2 corresponds to eating, and so on. And colors equals columns. So columns is the same, so specifying colors. And start angle equals 90. So if I change this basically specifies the rotation of how you want the plotting to be done. Shadows equals true, explode equals this thing. So if I this is basically to show just it's a simple type of visualization that you use. So if I suppose if I change this to 0.4 here, So what this will give me is that the second parameter, which is eating will slightly come out of the original pie plot. So this is used for maybe highlighting eating, something like that. This parameter specifies and points out the percentages of each parameter. So one more thing I would like to add is why pie plots are not used in visualizations, where you must have been, if you've been using visualization, your experience in visualization, you must have seen that pie plot is not used. Some of the, because there are some certain disadvantages which comes with it. So one disadvantage is that any dimensions greater than 4 or 5 elements looks bad on the pie plot, and it's usually hard to differentiate between different parameters or different elements that you're using. So here I'm just using 1, 2, 3, 4. If there were around 10, it would have been difficult for me to visualize here. And one more thing, one more disadvantage is the plots can represent only one type of data set. So this is something which I haven't shown here, but this is something which is again used for visualization, different types of categories. This can be done in the form of bar graphs. We will look at one example later on when I start with bouquet. And yeah, again, the decisions based on this visual impact can lead to inaccurate decisions. So this is just about it for matplotlib. I'm going to start with bouquet now. So does anyone have any questions? So again, yeah, PyPlot, why is it not used? So PyPlot is not used because of certain disadvantages. So I'll just repeat some of them. This some one particular disadvantage is that it cannot represent more than 4 or 5 parameters. Here I've represented only 4. So this basically means that if I had if I had more activities here, suppose in this line 4, if I had more activities, sleeping, eating, working, like suppose I had 10, it would be difficult for me to represent it in a pie plot, and it would be hard for me to visualize it. And yeah, that is one point. And again, one more point is making decisions on this can lead to inaccurate results and conclusions for for the modeling or whichever, if you're working on a project or not. And one more disadvantage is the plots can represent only one kind of data set. So like I said, we're going to be looking at one more example in bouquet, where there are stacked bar graphs and all. So that's what is not something that is not something that is available through PyPlot. So yeah, Akshat has a question. How can you visualize more than 3 dimensions in a single chart? Uh, Single chart. What do you mean by which kind of plot are you asking for? Okay, any chart. So you had asked for 3 dimensions. All right. So yeah, this is something I didn't discuss it here, but I had gone through it uh, in the initial part. For 3 dimensions, we can use a 3D plot. So this is I haven't mentioned it here. A 3D plot and an contour plot. So 3D plot is something you can specify for 3 dimensions, and the that is something that is not like I haven't done it here, but 3D plot can be used for 3 axes. And one more example for 3 dimensions is contour plot. Contour plot is basically something that represents 3 dimensions in 2 dimensions. So let me just give a visual representation how it is, so everyone can be clear with that. Yeah, here something like this. Yeah, here on the right of my screen, you can see that this is basically a 2D image but it is representing 3 dimensions. So that is, so yeah, these are the types of representations in 3 dimensions. Any other questions, or shall I continue? Okay, so I'll just continue with bouquet. Okay, so bouquet is, what is bouquet? Bouquet is just another library which is used in Python. It is, similar to matplotlib, but it has some additional features we'll be looking at. So some advantages for bouquet are, it can build complex plots, complex statistical plots. It provides visualizations in outputs like HTML server. So that is what we're going to be discussing later on, how it will provide outputs in server, and that is done through Django. We'll be looking at that later on. And one more important, the main, interact part of this bouquet is its interactivity. So like, there are factors where you can apply interaction and layout styling, and which can be implemented in your visualization. It's something similar to Tableau, and yeah, we'll look through it later on in this presentation. So yeah, here is just the detailed this necessary modules that I'm including for bouquet. And so this is the first I'm going to be running these uh, cells, so we can and the output is giving it's given on a different tab. So I'll just be running this. Before running this, okay, yeah, one more thing we have to look, just one thing I want to mention is, from bokeh.io we're importing output file. So this output file refers to an .html file that that is stored locally. So we're going to be looking through that. So okay, yeah, so here is line number 4 is basically our how we are going to be, is the the basic syntax for making a bokeh plot. So figure and title equals line plot. Again, x-axis label is x, y is y, and this is simple line graph. I'll just run this now. As you can see, this is stored locally in my computer. So this is a basic line plot, and yeah, this is a basic line plot. I'll be going through these. These are the tools on the right. You can see on the right of the graph, and I'll be going through these later on in the next few graphs. So yeah, that is one example for line graph. One more example we're looking at is the bar graph. So here we are giving some additional, parameters for our figure. So this is plot width 400 and plot height. These are some additional parameters. And to plot a horizontal bar, this is my syntax. So I'm specifying y, height, and the specifications of my graph. And here I'm specifying the color. So when I run this, I get a horizontal bar with color blue as mentioned, and my data for the each bar. So yeah, next one is next one is basically, okay, yeah, next one is a scatter plot, and this is, okay, for here I've just used s and s1 as list, and I'm appending some random digits so we can just scatter it randomly on our graph. And one more thing you must be looking at is line 8 and 9. That is the tools will be, which I had mentioned earlier also. These are the tools which we're going to be including in our graph, and we'll shortly see how they work when I run it. So again, I passed the parameters s and s1, marker equals circle. This is like exactly how we had used matplotlib for our pointer. We had specified, and oh, this is the same thing as that. Size, and then again color. So I'll just run this. Okay, so these are the random plots. Sorry, random points we get on our plot. So okay, one more thing we had was, we had passed some parameters for tools. So some tools are hover Crosshair and box zoom. So what is hover? Hover is basically me doing this exactly. What I'm just running over running over my graph. And crosshair is which obviously most of you must be knowing crosshair what it is. So that's the point where I'm be. So this if I'm looking at this point, this is my crosshair. Box zoom is something where again it's in the name. Box zoom is so I'll just select this. So when I box zoom, this is something that I can again, if I want to zoom in, I do this, and then again see it zooms into these 3 points. Any doubts? Okay. 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 So this is another type of you know bar graph. I'll be running this again. So this is again simple bar graph where I specified some counts for certain fruits, just to give an example. So that's just about it. And next one we're going to be looking at is something for okay. This one is slightly different because this is a stacked bar graph. So here I've been using animals, and then these are the years where we're going to be specifying the number of animals in each year. So again, these are the specifications, and then when I run this, I see, okay, here we go. So here you can see a crosshair, and for each bar graph, it's tagged for each year. So when I hover to cheetah, so cheetah in 2015, the count was 301, 16, 17. So that's how you can visualize through bokeh. This is something that is not there in matplotlib. So that this is one visualization. And one last one which we'll be looking at is another scatter plot. And here again, I've just computed some random variables, put it, and then displayed it. So when I run this, I get I get this scatter plot. So again, I'll be just going over through some tools. So this is box zoom. So if I zoom in on this thing on this area. So when I zoom in, I get this. Then if I want to zoom in more, I can do it as much as I want. See, yeah. If I want to. One more thing I had added was undo. So there was no undo in the previous ones. So undo is basically this going back to your again from zooming in. So if I just press undo, it just goes back. So yeah, that's it. So that's about it for our basics with bokeh. So does anyone have any doubts in this? Okay, why can we do this in bokeh and not in matplotlib? What's the secret sauce? So yeah, that bokeh is something that is again I had mentioned this before also as well. Bokeh is interactive. It's an interactive library, which is unlike matplotlib. Matplotlib doesn't have all these specifications and features, and this interactivity can be applied as well when we host all these graphs on our web servers. So we're going to be looking at that as well. Yeah, so any other doubts? What makes it interactive? What kind of code? Again, interactivity was specified here in some of the tools that I had mentioned.
You are forgetting that little thing you and me discussed about passing those two things that we passed to the HTML. Um, just recall that. You would even asked me, Rohit, what is this? You remember?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, yeah. Y- y-
So can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rohan. You remember our discussion? Those two things that we were passing to the HTML file, which I said is the reason. Then you even asked me, Rohit, what is this? And I explained that to you. Just recall our discussion.
Okay, I'm not exactly remembering it right now, but that was
The
included in our file,
the
right? In our
yeah, the CDN, this thing that I told you.
yeah, yeah. So that is yeah, we'll be looking. through that in our
Okay, okay.
explanation with the.
One second, one second. Don't get confused. The simple thing is interactivity is because of JavaScript.
Yeah.
Rest everything that is there is usually pure plots, or maybe within the HTML there is some SVG or something which is there. So I really don't know the background of Matplotlib. But the interactivity is got to do with two things, with JavaScript and
JavaScript and the web server which will host it onto.
JavaScript and the CSS and the CSS.
Yeah, yeah.
The,
So that's the front end part
yeah, the
of our
cascading style
graph.
sheets that I told you about. Yeah. Perfect. If anybody has any questions for Rohan, please go ahead right now. Otherwise, Rohan will go ahead and share those, code screenshots that I've shared with him, and will basically explain as to how this bouquet gets integrated into our project.
Okay, so I don't think so there are any doubts. Okay, so I'll just move forward then. Okay, so next we're going to be looking at how our code is, it how it works with Django. So Django is something, it's a web framework, and it's used to, it's running. So basically, Bokeh also has a, a separate web server that was used for itself. Like Poke had their own internal web server, but that wasn't stable. That's why we are using Django here. So I'll be just going through some of the screenshots, Sir had sent me regarding how we link it for putting and hosting it up to a web server. So I'll just be going through that now. Okay, can everyone see this screen, my screenshot? Okay, so yeah, this this screenshot is basically a function where we are defining our box plot. Box plot is another type of plot which I didn't discuss here. It's another type of graph here. So this is basically the code for specifying or necessary things that are required for our graph. So these are the things we have imported, and then we are using certain columns from some particular data frame from line 337. You can look at it from here. And what we have done is, yeah, this screenshot is the continuation. So what we've done is, these are the so line from line 441 to 445, you see that these are the certain, this is the Django part of it. So this is something, this is what is being returned from this function. So this function is called, and I'll just show you where this function is called. These are the things that are being returned. This is again includes the JavaScript part of it and then the CSS part of it. I'll just go through where how it is returned. Just a second. This screenshot is basically where we are calling this all these parameters. So again, you can see here in line 401, you can see all these parts are being called, and then from this function which was seen earlier on, and then this is passed through and put forward and rendered to our HTML code. So this HTML, I'm sorry, not the HTML code, the .html file, which will be then passed on to the server. So that is how we are using and integrating Django with it. And so this is okay. This is a JavaScript file for Bokeh, where again, sir, I had just explained, after finishing the presentation, even sir had just told us about the CSS part of it. So the interactivity and all. So this JavaScript is basically the again, it's showing the front end part of it. So this is the style sheet, and then CSS part, and then this is what is being returned. And again, uh, this is one more type of the same JavaScript. Yeah, again, one more thing, same thing. So yeah, that is how it is being used for Django. So yeah, I think does anyone has doubts in that?
Rohan, thanks a lot. You've explained it extremely well. Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah, yeah, fine, thanks.
Uh, I'll start sharing my screen. In case anybody has any doubts till now, you please ask me. I'm requesting Rohan to be on mute. I'll quickly walk you through whatever else I can. Rohan, you'll kindly have to be on mute.
Yeah, I just turned it off.
So I hope everybody can see my screen. So what Rohan was showing us was basically this HTML file. Now, this is exactly or almost exactly the same what gets generated as a standalone HTML when you are running through Bokeh. But this, around 2-3 years back, whenever I did this, this was not really the official recommended way of doing things on Bokeh. So if you look here, Bokeh has added support for Django very recently. You look at this particular file of theirs, and if you go ahead and look at the history of this particular file, I think this is just about a year and a half back that they've added up, support for Django and examples for Django. Otherwise, it wasn't there. But now that it is there, we could probably explore this as to how this gets embedded and stuff like that. The Django server embedding and all that. I have not really seen this myself. I'm just using it the earlier, almost hackish way of doing it. I picked up this code from somebody else on GitHub who again had at that point in time some kind of interaction with the guys on Bokeh, and they were okay with this. They said, yes, this is a good way of doing this. Now, what basically happens is this load static is just loading our Django static content. This CSS and this JavaScript, I'm again putting within Django template tags, and this is coming from the Bokeh file, which you saw on Rohan's screen. This one. So let's say we are looking at one plot. So most of these plots have the same structure. At the end of the method that is defined, we end up returning these, which is CDN JS box plot and CDN CSS box plot, JS box plot and div box plot. So this JS and div box plot, they are the ones which go in here. So this HTML div which is there. So div bokeh and JS bokeh, right? And the CDN part of it brings in the JavaScript and the CSS, and each and every bokeh plot. So the end result is basically a plot. So let me go up to this. So somewhere it is also called a figure. So some folks will end up calling it a figure only, but that figure which is there, it has got components within it, and one is a JS component and one is a component which I'm not sure what exactly it is. I have unfortunately not looked inside it, but this one most probably goes and gives the structure within the HTML DOM, and this one populates the JavaScript. Similarly over here, this one again is the JavaScript, and this is for the CSS. I have commented over here not required because probably I thought maybe we could run it with this also. I might have tested something, it will be somewhere in the code, but right now I will not go into that. So here is a basic structure of a method that you can end up coding, and in place of picking up a data frame and then basically displaying that data frame, what I did was I initially created pickle files on my local system to see if that was an effective way of doing things. But then later on, I also tried in place of the pickle file. So in this particular method, in place of the pickle file, I also went ahead and created some local storage item from basically storing the data that we are using for the plot within the browser. So once that gets passed to the browser, then at any given point in time within the user session, it was possible to go ahead and create 5-6 plots from the same DF. So this was a very basic use case. So in this basic use case, we are getting a data frame from the Python method, and then the same data frame is going ahead and getting rendered on the user screen as a data tables .js data table, and that same data table again just like it's in Tableau and others, wherein if the data set you are able to plot it in a certain manner, you end up showing default plots. So that's what I had done. But again, so this is one use case. We might have to do different things going ahead. So yeah, that is what it is. Any questions for me at this point, so that I might get into more detailed explanation? Anything that you want to know? If you don't have any questions, that means either you've not understood anything at all or you understood everything. So it is obviously not the case. So please come up with some questions at least. Akshat. Akshat, any questions at this stage?
Sir, can you explain that integration of that pickle file that you said earlier? I couldn't understand that thing. That you
Yeah, see,
stored a local storage.
yeah, see, what is happening is, let's say in your session, you go ahead and you want to create, you're working on a data set. So the basic concept is that you might have whole lots of data stored in your DB, but to do some kind of processing or do some kind of whatever it is that you're doing, you probably pull out a particular chunk out of that, right? So when you pull out that piece, in place of each and every method, because there are different methods which are creating different plots. There are different methods which are passing that particular say SQL data to the Python as a DF, and then that DF is coming ahead to JavaScript to get plotted on the screen as a data tables .NET this thing data table, so to say. So all of these, in case they start accessing the DB, then obviously the application will become slow. So one option is that you end up storing pickle or some kind of Python this thing. What is that term? Wherein you compress the data. So whether using pickle or other options, but most of these options, when I kind of looked at them, were slower than putting something in the browser. So in place of doing this, we ended up putting things into the browser storage itself, and then picking up as JSON from there, and then doing our plotting. Now there again the struggle is that if I pick up the JSON and then I try and do my plotting, and I don't necessarily go back to the server, and on the client side only I want to do all my rendering and everything, then bokeh I can't use, or at least maybe I didn't research enough, so bokeh I can't use. So maybe then I have to go for d3.js or dc.js and other things. So those also I have kind of experimented with, and those are in the existing code. The other thing is I think Rohan also missed that out, and if you were to look at this particular file over here, so it's been there for almost, I think, it's mid last year, and unfortunately I haven't had the time to change it after that. But you see all this pickle stuff and everything happening there also, so you can go through this code, and then you will have much more pointed and specific questions for me, which I will answer. So this is part of the this repo which has been lying there, and this is the repo for whatever front end stuff that I had at that point in time for this particular project. And also I've gone ahead and I've gone ahead and created some issues over here. So if whenever you find time, if you can go through all of these, you will at least understand at what stage the things were, and then it kind of stalled, because after that I have not coded in this project anything. So that is where it is stuck. So Paras also had a question for us today, saying that where is this code? So for almost 6-7 months this code has just been lying there, and most of this is just mostly it is just very basic Python, and it doesn't even show up the JavaScript, because most of the JavaScript is embedded within these HTML files. That's not the way I have it currently, but again, it's not very different what I have right now. So yeah, so a brief understanding you'll get over there, and then of course I'm myself trying to fix most of these things, comment them, create my doc strings and all that, whatever. Not very. Not in a very professional way, but at least so that when I share this with you, everybody ends up understanding as to what is happening. Otherwise, I'll have to I don't know, I'll have to go through hours and hours, maybe just to kind of share what is happening. So Akshay, does that answer your question?
Yeah, cool, sir. I will check out the code.
Yeah. Rajshri, Shashwat, Shubham, any questions? Abhishek, anything?
Not right now, sir. I'll have to go through the whole topic.
Yeah, Abhishek, any questions? Paras, anything? If nothing right now, then we can start off with the Shubham session. We don't have to log out, because that was 7:30, so we can continue on this call itself. Shubham, are you okay with that?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah,
Sure.
please, you share your this thing screen. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, okay. Okay. So can you see my screen? I've shared it. Uh,
Yeah, we can say that.
okay, okay, sure. So I shall be starting. So what is our task? Basically, we need to understand that first. Um, so here in Patent Spike, what we were doing actually, we were trying to compare different patents. First, we were taking the PDF files and then we were converting them into text, and then we were converting them into documents and vectors, and then we were comparing them. So what we are doing here instead is directly we are going to the URL and we are scraping that file from the web itself. So you can see this is one kind of that patent. It's from the United States patent. Yeah, this is the patent. It's actually very poorly structured when I talk about its code, because there are no classes, no IDs. So yeah, very difficult to scrape, but still. So let's start. What we have done here, we have used Selenium, of course, as uh, the web scraping tool. There are a couple of commands that I've used. To install Selenium, of course, we're installing it. We are installing the driver. We are setting the path uh, for this Google Colab. As I'm running it on Google Colab, means I have to set this particular path for the Chrome driver to work. So I'm importing the web driver, and these are some of the options. Headless, here I see headless as was filled in uh, one of his sessions. That means that we don't have a GUI for our web browser. We are connecting to the browser through our command line. So that's what we are doing here. These are some other Chrome options that we are using so that it doesn't crash what we're trying to run on it. So I've already run this, so it will install and stuff. So need not run it again. Okay, NLTK. So NLTK is nothing but Natural Language Toolkit. So it gives us various tools that it has, and it helps in, of course, natural language processing. WordNet is something that is having a huge net of words which we can use. I'll be telling you where and when we require it. So from Selenium import WebDriver, okay, it's I think I've just written it again. Pandas and Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup helps us extract from these HTML documents. For example, the one that we are using here, we are using the United States patent. So if I inspect it, as I told you, it's very poorly written. What happened? Yeah, it's slow on my system, it seems. So all are in the format of tables. This is a table here. So all these are in the for tables, and these are some passages in my body. Okay, so we shall move forward. Here we are importing the necessary requirement. T is basically for pattern regex, pattern matching, that I'll be talking about. NLTK we already saw. So word lemmatizer. What is this lemmatizer? Actually, in terms of word processing, when we see, there are two methods. One is stemming and another is lemmatizing. So like it totally depends on the user or the developer who is doing what to use, and on it also depends on what task actually we are focusing. So one lematizer is basically sample it. So it become 8. So it is okay for these kind of words, but some words may come if it is still having meaning of its own. The set of in corpus, its plural is corpora. So if you cut corpora, it will be corp or corp. Doesn't, but on the other hand, do lemmatization, it will actually convert the word. It will understand the context of the word and then convert it into a meaningful word. For example, running will be run only, but corpora will become corpus. So from singular, plural to singular, and those kind of transformations. So that is why here I am using lemmatization as word processing. Then here word tokenize. So this is nothing but just converting a string of documents into like space separated words. Like if I get a huge string of a document, every word separated by space in the form of array, like tokenize, that's what it means, right? So it's just pre-processing tools here. TF-IDF vectorizer. Okay, so this is it actually creates embeddings, which I'm going to talk about later. Just to get from the scikit-learn package. Here I'm getting the Chrome driver. We can use any other browser. Here Chrome options mean I had just specified at the start some options like headless, no sandbox, and all this. So we are fitting those options here. Yeah, so we get the driver here, webdriver.chrome. So what I've done here, I've just taken two URLs where I'll scrape. So one is this patent, and the other one is basically, I think, yeah, this link. So I shall not open, it's just a similar patent. So two links I have taken as of now, just for explanation purpose. So here, final docs and doc names are just my final arrays where I'm going to store my data, what I'm scraping from that particular web page. So for page and pages, of course, pages I can have multiple URLs. Then only now whatever document I'm getting, it will be only for two documents. So it is not a very good way of judging what vectors I am getting, whether they are correct or not, because so less data cannot actually provide good vectors. But still, we shall see what we are getting as of now. So driver.getPage, driver is getting that URL, and this is simple. Just content page source means whatever the page source, the inspect element I showed you, the code that is getting stored in the content. And Beautiful Soup, as I told, it parses those contents in the form of HTML tags and finds which what data to extract under which tag. So that's what I'm using here, soup, Beautiful Soup, that content, and soup.find all table. So what it will do, it will find all the table tags within that code or source code of this United States page, as I opened just now, the inspect element. And yeah, it will store it in A, and A will find all the T bodies within that table. Why I'm selecting T body is because all these documents are having the same T heads. As you can see here, the headings, for example, application number, the word application number, the word filing date. So these won't give any information to my document vector, because for all the documents it is same. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to compare different documents, right? So that is why I've taken here only T body. Here re.split, this here re, this import re I've done for regular expression. Just I'm splitting in terms of next line. And table le.text, table le I fit for everything, every element where I get a T body inside the table. So from that, what is the text inside that T body, that I'm storing in table data. So table data is basically an array. So for all the pages, I mean for that particular page, for all the table tags, whatever T body data is there, it will be stored as in that table data array. Similarly, I'm doing this for body because I told you some of the data is stored in form of table and some of the data is stored in only as a paragraph. They have no classes or IDs or anything specific. So we need not worry about all those as of now. Yeah, so that's about getting the data. Now docs. Now what I'm doing is basically, this is a regular expression which just removes all the spaces and extra tabs in the document. So here I can see every time I enter, and these many spaces are there between these two lines, this line and this line. Did I get any message? Okay. So yeah, so that's about it. This is a regex that I'm using, and I'm replacing every data in that table data that I've just collected with this. So basically, I'm just making my data more in a more better format, and I'm storing it in, again, docs as a form of a string. So plus means nothing; it's a string concatenation with a space so that it looks normal. And docs, again, we are appending the data into docs. So same we are doing as we did it 2 times above. You must have seen one for T body and one for body, because there are 2 forms of data stored in that particular patent file in the web. So that is why 2 times separately we are doing the same work, just removing the spaces and concatenating them into a particular doc, and later we are joining them. So this all were just pre-processing to get our data into a better format so that we can feed it to a vectorizer. Again, whatever doc finally we got after appending, we are just word tokenizing it. Why? Because I already talked about lemmatization, if you remember. So lemmatization I have to do word by word, so that basically what this word vectorizers will work on, they will work on word counts that I will be telling you just now. So for that, if run and running and eat and eating are 2 different words, but their context is same, right? So their meaning is same. So they shouldn't be considered two different words. So then we can get a better accuracy as to, not actually accuracy, a better probability value. So that's why I'm using this lemmatization here. And I'm also checking if it is al num, because there were many places in the file where I saw just star values. The last, okay, this one. So like it is just a safeguarding, nothing else. So that we get only alphanumeric values, all numeric values, all alphabet values. Yeah, so in the final docs, we are finally appending whatever final string document that we have got in the form of string, catering to each page URL that I've given, because I've used a for loop. And here doc names, okay. So I have to, whenever I represent my values, I have to know which document it caters to. So I see here this one is the number application, not application number actually, the page number. If I can United States patent. So I find the X path of this. I set it. You might be knowing this, but still, yeah. So here I see. I just right click on it, copy X path. So that X path I put here. So and driver dot find element by X path. So it is very natural. Of course, I'm putting that X path and what the text is there inside that X path. So doc names is getting for whatever page I'm accessing through its URL. I'm just storing its document name, its application, its patent number in this doc name, so that I can identify it. As of now, there are only two. You can see here, two doc names. All right. So now, okay, now comes TF-IDF vectorizer. So what we are doing is basically just until now we have just got the document format, pre-processed data catering to each URL. All right. So, but that we cannot feed to understand the similarity between the document. So we have to convert it into form of embedding a vector. So what we can use many different models are there for creating these vectors. For example, word2vec, bag of words, TF. So I am using here TF-IDF vectorizer. So what is TF-IDF vectorizer actually means? What it does inside? Now that I'm directly getting it from the scikit library, right? So what it actually means is TF means term frequency. So for each word, what is the count of that word in the document, and IDF is inverse document frequency. So for that word, in how many document that word is present. So how it is calculated is TF is nothing but count of that logarithm of count of that particular word. And why we are using logarithm? Yeah, of course, because the value might be very large. If we take many documents, some words may appear like huge number of times. So that time we will have difficulty in playing with large numbers. So we are using logarithm here. Logarithm of TF, count of that word is TF, term frequency, and IDF is the total number of documents by in how many documents divided by in how many documents we find that particular word, and of course logarithm of that, and then we multiply both TF and IDF to get the score TF IDF. So why we are using this, not anything else. So there in documents there might be some words, for example what, if, yeah, the. So these kind of words can actually come a lot of times, and if I only use a count vectorizer kind of a vector excuse me, which counts the number of times it occurs, so that won't be a very good estimate, because of course, as you understand, if one document has so many number of those and another document has so many number of those, it doesn't talk about its the similarity between the two documents, right? So what this IDF does, because the is present in every other document, this IDF value decreases, right? So due to that, when I multiply TF into IDF, the whole value decreases here. So the is not a very crucial parameter to decide the similarity between two documents. That is what we wanted actually. So that is why here we use a TF IDF kind of a vectorizer. So we can use other kind of vectorizers. Nothing is hard and fast out here, but we are just demonstrating you one way. So here we are fitting it. We have directly got it from scikit-learn, I told you. So we are just fitting the our final doc document, which has, as of now, final doc is just two documents. And yeah, I'm here. So this is my final vectors. Here I have just tried to print one of them. So what I'm doing is, actually this vectorizer is in the form of an object, right? So first I'm taking the 0, it means there are 0 and 1, two indices because there are two documents. So I'm taking just the first document, and I'm then this dot t to dense is actually extracting this information from that object, and this index is giving the index names, the X names you are getting here, all this, the access to resource, and TF-IDF is the column name. All right. So here you will argue with me that okay, you told that the is comes should have a less value, right? Because it comes many times in all documents, and it is not a very good aspect as to whether there are similarities between a document. So I would say that why the is having a good this thing here, because I have only two data that I have taken, only two documents, right? And that those are also not very big documents, as you can see, very small document as normal patents are, you might have seen, but that's okay, that's okay. So only when I have a lot many data can I get a particular good values for this, and only can then I argue that whether these values are correct or not. So this is just for demonstration purpose, so that's why I have taken only two documents as of now. You can see if mark is coming only in one time, you can understand mark, hoyos, if these kind of words are coming only in one document, their value is getting, their count is getting really less. And if they are coming a significant number of times but only in one document, then their count increases but TF-IDF decreases. So that is how this TF-IDF vector balances the vector, then understands what value to give. So one thing you should understand, that these all 1 2 7 6 rows into one columns you must have seen. So both the documents will have the same number of dimensions, you have to understand. And this TF-IDF is the one which is calculating what will be the score of that particular word vector. So that is how it is distinguished, but of course the dimensions should be same for both the documents or any number of documents that we cater to. All right, so here again, we from scikit-learn we can easily get cosine similarity. So what is cosine similarity? Why we are using it? So there are many questions. Basically, if think that when do you use a Euclidean distance? You will use a Euclidean distance only when you are just you just want to talk about the magnitude between two different two vectors as of now. But here we are not talking about the magnitude, because it is not only the counts of the words that we have to match. We have to match the similarities, right? So why we are using cosine similarity? We must have heard about this, of course, cos theta. Why we are using cos theta? If you plot these two vectors in a multidimensional this thing axis, then you will find if you try to characterize it as a right angle triangle, one will be the base and other will be the hypotenuse, right? Because they are emerging from the same point. So that is why the angle between them is the best factor to tell what is the similarity between them. And lower the angle, more the similarity, that you can visualize. I think lower the angle, the two vectors are closer to each other, right, on the dimensions. So that means it has more similarity. These two system. See, there are many, as I already told you, there's a question, can't we use Pearson correlation for similarity? There are many methods of, there's no hard and fast rule, I've already told. If you talk about vectorizing or you talk about getting the similarity, but we have found out that this is in our use case. What is our use case? It is document finding the similarity between the document. In such cases, cosine similarity has found out to be getting very good results, right? So that is why we are using cosine similarity. Even if you we had one of the meetings, I remember, and somebody who was leading us that time, he also suggested us to use cosine similarity, but I sure researched about it, and then I got to know that in such use cases, as I already told you about this thing, no, if you use some Pearson similarity you're talking about, or something other, some other similarity based on a Euclidean distance, it all has its different use cases, right? So we have found out that cosine similarity works best when you're talking about comparison between documents. All right. So that is why here we use cosine similarity. Even if you talk about vectorizers also, we can use any different kind of vectorizer. But again, the problem is if you use, for example, you want to use word to vec instead of TF-IDF, you have to mention a dimension, right? What TF-IDF is doing, it is automatically getting an equal number of dimension. But for example, if we had multi-dimensional variables and we used word to vec, then we had to pad another vector with zeros until it becomes equal to the first one. So it all depends on the use and like what task you are actually aiming at. So there is like we can't debate on that topic. It's just something we have seen. We have seen history, how it works, and we are actually that's why we are using this as of now. So yeah, that's part of it. So here I was talking about cosine similarity, right? So what it is doing as of now, TF-IDF vectors, as I told you here, these are the vectors 0 and 1, right? So as I am giving it directly, it is giving me a matrix of the each uh, file having each document having its similarity scores. Mind it, these are not cosine similarity values; these are scores, right? So what do you understand by 1? Of course, means they are totally similar, and of course, it is very much understandable because both are the same documents, right? And in the other document, we have found 0.76, and it is also very trivial that this will be a symmetric matrix about the diagonal. So if we want to give any query, for example, there are a lot many vectors that we have already had. We have trained our like we have made our TF-IDF vector, and we want to query one document, and we want to find whether it is matching with what are the top 5, for example, it is matching with or something like that. Or so what we can do, we can just remove this TF-IDF vectorizer here, and that particular document that we want to query, we will make a vector of that particular document and we'll feed in here. So then what will happen? We will not get a matrix like this because that is a singular vector that we give here. So we will just get an array of all the documents present or whatever. For example, say we want to print only the top 5. So we just give a statement like that to print the top 5. So we will get only the top 5 documents and its similarity with the top 5 documents. So that kind of a query can also be handled. So that's all about it. Yeah, so any questions? Is there any method to find out similarities for certain text parts? For example, only the similarity between the abstracts of each document. Okay. So what we can do in that case is we can actually break our what we are taking as a document. For example, what we are input we are taking into our vector, because if we give uh, our vector as an array, as a multivariable array for what you are saying. For example, the first field as abstract, second field as something else, and third field as something else, and similar for some other document. So that won't work with the TF-IDF vectorizer as of now, as far as I know. No, that means I'm sure about this, that it won't work with the TF-IDF vectorizer. So what in that case we'll have to do, we have to create different vectors. Oh, any message? Okay, no. So in that case, what we'll have to do, we'll have to create different vectors for each of these uh, abstracts. For example, abstract, we create a vector and we get the similarity, and then we can multiply and get the overall similarity. For example, what happens when we work with naive Bayes classifiers? Because we consider them independent, we can just multiply and get the probability. For example, if we talk about scores or probability, or I think there might be something that I have to research about, if we can directly use it in the format that you are asking. For example, taking it in the form of in the one singular document, creating subparts of that document. But I, of course, I tried it here, what you are asking, but it did not work with it because it expects a string input, right? I tried to give array and string, but it did. But there might be a solution to that directly. Indirect is a way, but that is not very. Mm, I don't think that is a good way, good practice. If there exists a way, I have not really researched into that. But okay, that's a nice point. I'll look into it. So yeah, any other problems? Any other doubts in vectorizers or scraping? It's a really easy topic as far as I think. Nothing complex to do. Just using the libraries, but it's also that you should understand what is happening behind it. Just blindly using libraries is not very good habit. So what this TF-IDF is doing, why is this cosine similarity being used, why it is, why we are not using something else, or we might use something else and get what kind of results. So we can research all of that. Yeah. So any questions? Uh, I was expecting some questions. So no questions. Okay. So that's about it. I think I've explained a bit of it. And yeah, another thing, Rohan. Sorry. Yeah, you were asking about that different similarities to for certain text parts. So if what I am doing right now is I am giving the input in the form of direct text. So what the vector it is creating, it is based on that text only. So don't think that these different parts of these different parts of text are not being matched. For example, if you are thinking that way, means it is not really that. The TF-IDF vectors are working in such a way that these parts are getting matched, not specifically with each other, but yes, they are sharing their part in getting the similarity of that particular document. So it is not that it's totally away from each other, but yeah, your query also I liked. I would like to research more into that as of now. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. If, if any doubts, please let me know. No. Okay.
Shubham, thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Sure. No.
The web scraping part, okay, I could understand, but I obviously need to go through the TF-IDF part. I'm not that familiar with it, so I'll try and learn. And it's yeah, I think this should be an excellent start to be able to learn further.
Okay.
If yeah, so if anybody else has any questions, please go ahead. As far as I'm concerned, Shubham has reverted back to me in just 2-3 hours with this. Okay, so what I can understand is that he's got a excellent grip on the concepts over here. Yeah, please go ahead and ask him whatever you want.
No, Avirup, I've not written anything in Scrapy. It's just normal Python. I've not used any other libraries. Just Selenium. Selenium I've used for web scraping. That's it. The core. Yeah, sure, Rohan. I'll share it on the Slack. If sir, I think if you have doubts on TF-IDF, I can just repeat it once. If you want.
No, I said I don't have any doubts. You explained it really well, so that's okay. In case anybody else wants, please you cater to their questions. I'm
Okay.
absolutely okay. No problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Shashwat. Yes, TF and IDF are two different values. How we convert it into TF IDF is basically we get the TF value, we multiply it with the IDF value, right? So that gives the score. As I already told you, what is TF and IDF? TF is the term frequency, that is the count of a particular word, and IDF is inverse document frequency. Means that particular word is present in which all documents. For example, total documents divided by in how many documents that particular word is present. And the log of both of these is respectively TF and IDF, which we multiply to get the scores. Yeah. And yeah, Akshat, I'll be sharing the notebook just right after the session. Uh, any more questions? Avirup, I think if you have shared your query, you can mute. I shall mute. Yeah, that's okay. So, okay, if there are no questions, then we can call it a day. We can leave the call if it is fine with everyone. Sure, sir, no problem. Okay. Okay, guys. And an excellent session, Rohan. Thanks, Akshat. Thanks. Okay. So we shall leave.